The smell of roasting turkey and warm cider was supposed to be a comfort. It was my Thanksgiving. My name is Sophia Miller, and I had built the perfect festive facade. But a secret conversation overheard from the study changed everything. The documents I found proved it. My brother was being given my future, and my parents were handing him the knife. The betrayal wasn't just quiet. It was systematic, wrapped in a holiday bow. I was faced with a choice: stay silent and lose everything, or burn it all down to save myself. This is the story of how my family's perfect holiday became my battlefield. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The scent of rosemary rubbed turkey and simmering cider was supposed to be a comfort. It was the smell of my childhood, of every Thanksgiving I'd ever known. This year, it was supposed to be mine. At 26, I'd finally convinced my parents to let me host in my own home, a charmingly small bungalow that I'd poured every spare cent and weekend into. The warm lights were strung perfectly, the heirloom china was set, and the subtle sounds of a jazz playlist filled the spaces between the bustle. Neighbors were already dropping by with pies and bottles of wine, their laughter echoing the nostalgic warmth I'd been trying to orchestrate. I worked at a local nonprofit. I built community for a living, and damn it, I was going to build the perfect Thanksgiving. My idealism was my best and worst quality. My mother, Margaret, fluttered around my kitchen, wringing her hands even as she smiled. "Oh, Sophia, it's all just beautiful. Are you sure you don't need help with the gravy? Your father does so hate lumpy gravy." Her voice was soft, perpetually poised on the edge of an apology, a human buffer meant to absorb conflict and keep the peace. I smiled, patting her arm. "It's handled, Mom. Really. Go talk to Mrs. Henderson." She nodded, relieved to be given a direction, and drifted away. Then the front door opened, and the energy in the house tilted. Jonathan. My older brother arrived not just as a person, but as an event. Charismatic, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in a cashmere coat that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, he commanded the room instantly. "Soph house looks great, really. Almost professional." He kissed my cheek, his smile bright and cold. My father, Thomas, emerged from the den, his chest puffing with pride. "Jonathan. There he is. Knew you'd make it." He clapped Jonathan on the back, a gesture of approval I couldn't remember ever receiving. My father, the patriarch, a man who believed appearances were a down payment on reality, looked at my brother like he was a blue-chip stock. I retreated to the kitchen to check the bird, my smile feeling stretched. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Emily, my best friend. Surviving the Miller vortex. Emily was my reality check, the one person who saw my family with the clear, unsparing eyes of an outsider. So far, I typed back. Turkey is golden. The facade is holding. I hit send just as I pulled a bottle of Pinot Noir from the rack. I needed to grab the good crystal from the study where Dad had insisted on storing it for safekeeping. As I approached the door, which was slightly ajar, I heard their voices, my parents, low and serious. I paused, the bottle heavy in my hand. "It just makes sense, Margaret," my father was saying, his tone firm and final. "Jonathan is ready to take on the business, and the inheritance needs to reflect that responsibility. It's cleaner this way." My stomach went cold. "But Sophia..." Mom's voice was a thread. "What about her stake? She loves this family." A sharp, impatient sigh from my father. "Sophia has her little projects. She doesn't understand the pressure, the legacy. Jonathan does. It's settled. We'll finalize the new trust paperwork after Christmas." I backed away, silent, the bottle suddenly feeling slick in my grip. Little projects. My life's work dismissed in a sentence. I felt a strange hollow ringing in my ears. I walked back to the kitchen on autopilot, placing the wine on the counter with a shaking hand. The warmth of the room felt artificial now, the scent of roasting turkey suddenly sickening. At dinner, the feeling intensified. I'd prepared my grandmother's cornbread stuffing, a complex recipe everyone supposedly loved. I'd also just secured a major grant for the youth center I ran, something I'd been working on for 6 months. When I mentioned it, trying to reclaim some sense of myself, Jonathan laughed a charming, dismissive sound. Always saving the world, Soph. That's nice. I was just telling Dad about the new high-rise deal I'm closing. The commission alone could buy this neighborhood. My father beamed. That's my son. Always thinking of the future. My grant, my stuffing, my house. All of it vanished, rendered invisible by the sheer gravitational pull of Jonathan's ambition. I looked at my mother, who was busy cutting her turkey into perfect tiny squares, her eyes fixed firmly on her plate. A silent table. The humiliation was subtle, a prickling heat under my skin. It was the confusion that was worse, the disquiet. Was I imagining it? Had I misunderstood? The cognitive dissonance was dizzying, the festive house, the smiling faces, and this cold, creeping suspicion. Later, as the guests were leaving and I was stacking plates, the doorbell rang. It was late past 9. A courier stood on the porch holding a long, impossible leak velvet blue box, obviously from a high-end jeweler. "For Jonathan Miller," the courier said, checking his device. My father stepped forward, signing for it with a proprietary air. "Thank you. That will be all." He handed the box to Jonathan, who took it with a knowing smirk. "Starting Christmas early, Dad." "Just a small token," my father said, but his eyes flickered to my mother, a shared secretive glance. It wasn't a family gift. It was for Jonathan. An early, expensive, separate gift. It was a lock clicking into place, a door being firmly shut. I stood there holding a stack of dirty plates, and for the first time I felt the chill of the November night seep right through the walls, straight into my bones. The doubts were no longer just doubts. They were a warning. The days following Thanksgiving were an exercise in maintaining a brave face while feeling a cold sickness settle in my core. The conversation I'd overheard, the dismissal of my grant, and that sleek, secretive gift box for Jonathan, it all fused into a single ugly truth that I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just favoritism, it was active exclusion. Early December settled over the town, bringing with it the artificial cheer of synchronized holiday lights, but my world was muted, my focus narrowed to a desperate search for confirmation. I began my quiet investigation, starting with the one place I knew my father kept his most important paperwork, a bolted filing cabinet in the back of his home office. I knew the combination, it hadn't changed since I was 10, a tribute to his predictability. Waiting until a Tuesday afternoon, when they were both out at a charity luncheon, I drove to the main house. The air was thick with the scent of pine and impending snow. My hands were clammy as I worked the dial. Left to 30, right to 15, left to 9. The lock clicked open with a dull metallic sound that sounded deafening in the silence. Inside, filed neatly behind labeled tabs, was the evidence. I pulled out a thick manila envelope marked simply, "Miller Business Restructuring." What I found was horrifyingly systematic. There were copies of emails between my father and his financial advisor discussing mitigating risk associated with secondary inheritors. There were detailed proposals outlining Jonathan's immediate placement onto the board of directors for the Miller Family Trust, a position I had always been led to believe we would share. But the worst was a series of signed agreements related to a property acquisition that had been pending for 2 years, a parcel of land I had personally been scouting for my nonprofit to build a permanent community resource center. The documents confirmed that the land, which was always intended as a family donation through the trust, was now being funneled directly into a holding company established by Jonathan, ostensibly for future Miller commercial development. My future, my center, my dream. It wasn't just overlooked. It was being actively financially undermined and redirected for his sole benefit. The letters didn't lie, the spreadsheets didn't gaslight. Betrayal was confirmed in cold written form. When my parents returned, I tried to approach them calmly, the documents folded tightly in my pocket. "Dad, Mom." I found some papers in the office, the ones about the restructuring and the land on Elm Street. "Can we talk about this?" My father's jaw immediately hardened. "Sophia, you shouldn't have been poking around. Those are private family matters." My mother's eyes darted between us, settling nervously on the floor. I pressed him, detailing what I'd seen. The response was immediate and practiced gaslighting. "You're misunderstanding the legal terms, honey. Jonathan is simply a better fit for the commercial side of things," Dad insisted, his voice reasonable yet patronizing. "We are protecting your assets by keeping them separate from the riskier ventures." My mother chimed in. "It's about protecting the family, darling. Don't you want peace? Don't you want to keep the peace?" They reframed my righteous indignation as a petty misunderstanding, painting me as the emotional one, the disruptive one. The tension spilled over later that week at the annual neighborhood holiday cocktail party. I was attempting to drum up support for the youth center grant, now a desperate need since the land was gone, when Jonathan swaggered over. He took a sip of champagne and lowered his voice, the charm never fading, only turning sharper. "Still playing in the sandbox. Soph. Look, I heard about your little grant issue. Just drop it. You need to focus on something realistic. Get a nice husband, maybe. Dad said you could use one of the smaller condos we own. It's better than this constant embarrassing struggling." His suggestion wasn't an offer of help. It was a cage. He was belittling my ambitions with kindness, using charm to mask cruelty, and he did it in front of Mrs. Davies, a local council member I desperately needed to impress. The social pressure was palpable. For years I had been the Miller family's good citizen, the one who volunteered, who built community. Now when I talked about my work, the neighbors' eyes flickered away, their smiles tight. They favored Jonathan, the one with the demonstrable wealth, the one tied to the important part of the family legacy. I felt the sharp sting of isolation, the realization that they valued proximity to power more than genuine character. But the isolation didn't crush me. It sharpened me. I retreated to Emily, showing her the evidence. She was horrified but clear-eyed. "This isn't about love, Soph. It's a business transaction they dressed up as a family dynamic. You have to treat it that way." Her words flipped a switch. The sorrow I felt transformed into a cold, simmering determination. I stopped arguing. I stopped pleading. I started documenting everything. Every email, every document, every dismissive comment, every instance of gaslighting, creating a timeline of deceit. I was no longer a hurt daughter. I was a plaintiff preparing her case. I began to strategize quietly, reflecting on my own values of honesty and dignity, realizing that reclaiming my agency meant confronting the bitter truth. The people I trusted most actively opposed my success. I would no longer seek their validation. I would seek justice. The game wasn't over. It was just moving to a different, more dangerous table. Christmas Eve. The air was frigid outside, but inside the main Miller house the atmosphere was suffocatingly warm, thick with expensive perfume, roasting duck, and the deceptive glow of tradition. This was always the largest gathering. Extended family, close business associates, and key community leaders were all invited, ensuring that any moment of weakness or discord would be amplified. For years, this environment had been my father's stage and Jonathan's spotlight. Tonight, it would be mine. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed the skirt of my dress. I wasn't scared of the consequences. I was scared of the exposure, the absolute irreversible burning of the bridge. But after weeks of compiling the evidence, the fear was eclipsed by a fierce protective fire, a need to reclaim my dignity and my future. I knew that confronting them in private would lead to another round of gaslighting and dismissal. To be heard, I had to be seen. My preparation was meticulous. Every relevant document, the revised trust papers, the emails about the land deal, the financial statements detailing Jonathan's preferential business opportunities, was safely secured in a sleek brown leather folder I carried like a shield. Emily arrived early as planned. She knew the mission. As an outsider, she wouldn't be swayed by the family's history or charm. She squeezed my arm, her eyes full of quiet, fierce support. "You're doing the right thing, Soph. You deserve the truth." Then I saw him, Mr. Harrison, a retired judge and a longtime family friend, now acting as a mentor to the local nonprofit sector. He was a man known for his rigid ethics. I caught his eye and gave him a brief, significant nod. He was my sympathetic community member, my anchor of moral clarity in the room. The tension started as soon as the main course was cleared. My father Thomas stood up for his usual toast, a grandiloquent speech about family unity, legacy, and the bright future that Jonathan was poised to inherit. He raised his crystal glass. To Jonathan he boomed, turning to my brother, who smiled the smile of a prince already crowned. To the future of the Miller name, carried forward by its strongest pillar. Before anyone could drink, I pushed back my chair, the sudden scraping sound echoing through the dining room. Silence fell instantly heavy and disbelieving. I walked slowly to the head of the table, placing the brown folder down next to my father's plate. My heart was pounding like a drum, but my voice when it came was steady. Before we raise that glass, I think we need to be honest about the foundation that this family legacy is built upon. Because the pillar you're celebrating, Dad, is built on a very deep and very systematic deception. The confrontation scenes began. My father's face went scarlet. Sophia, what is the meaning of this spectacle? This is neither the time nor the place. No, Dad, I countered, looking directly at him, then at the ring of shocked faces around the table. This is exactly the place, because the whole community is here, and the whole community deserves to know the ethics of the family they trust. I opened the folder, pulling out the copy of the amended trust. This document, I announced, holding it up, was signed last month. It systematically removes me from any substantial stake in the family's wealth, transferring it all to Jonathan in exchange for my small local projects being treated as an embarrassment. I laid it down and picked up the emails regarding the land deal. This land, which I was promised for a much-needed community youth center, was quietly funneled into a private holding company under Jonathan's name, undermining my professional efforts and stealing a resource from this town. Jonathan jumped up, his usual charm replaced by pure venom. This is insane. She's unhinged. Just looking for attention, Dad. These are business decisions. She's manipulating things. Don't you listen to her. He tried to grab the documents, but I pulled the folder away, shielding it with my body. No, Jonathan, I said, my voice rising, trembling with the force of my outrage. This is the truth. The difference between you and me is that I actually built something with integrity while you used inherited power to systematically undermine your own sister. I looked at my mother. Mom, why did you let this happen? Why did you prioritize keeping the peace over your own daughter's future? My mother. Margaret finally broke. She covered her face with her hands, issuing a broken, whispered, I'm sorry, Sophia. I didn't know how to stop him. Her remorse, though late, was real. The emotional core was high stakes. I felt fear, anger, and a rush of moral vindication that was almost intoxicating. I had taken control. My father, realizing the depth of his public exposure, was furious but impotent. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. Thomas, if this documentation is accurate, this is not just an internal family matter. This is a serious ethical issue, especially concerning the community land trust. His support was the turning point. It reinforced my moral clarity and threatened Jonathan's public standing. The confrontation ended in family chaos. Jonathan, humiliated, stormed out, slamming the front door. My father slumped into his chair, his face pale with fury and defeat. The community members looked around awkwardly, some with judgment, some with dawning respect. I stood alone at the head of the table, the documents still clutched in my hand, my heart soaring with exhilarating freedom, yet aching with the cost. The table was no longer silent. It was shattered. My future now hung not on their approval, but entirely on my next decision. Where would I go from this wreckage? The silence that descended after the shattering chaos of Christmas Eve was worse than the confrontation itself. It was the absolute deafening sound of a family unit fracturing. The immediate aftermath was messy, ugly, and relentlessly final. I didn't stay the night. I drove home to my quiet bungalow, leaving the shattered pieces of the Miller legacy behind me on the mahogany floor. The family rifts deepened instantly. My phone was silent, save for a few texts from cousins too distant or too fearful to take a side, and the steady stream of support from Emily. The trust, the fundamental bond of shared history, was irreversibly fractured. The consequences for Jonathan were swift, though perhaps not as severe as I'd hoped. Judge Harrison's quiet withdrawal of support for Jonathan's new commercial venture was enough. Within days, I learned that the press surrounding the local youth center land deal, which I had leaked to a sympathetic contact, had caused him serious discomfort with his business partners. The optics of stealing a community asset from his own sister during Christmas were too toxic even for the cutthroat world of real estate. He didn't lose everything, but he faced serious professional setbacks and public scrutiny, forcing him to scramble to restore his reputation. My parents' reaction was more complex. My father initially maintained a cold, furious silence, focused solely on damage control. He called me once not to apologize, but to warn me about the permanent damage I had caused to the family name. "You've alienated us, Sophia. This is on you," he snarled, still refusing to acknowledge the injustice. But my mother Margaret was different. In the post-Christmas lull, she called repeatedly. When I finally answered, she was crying. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I should have told you. I tried to talk to him, but I was just so afraid of losing the peace of disappointing Thomas. I see now that I disappointed you instead." She was slowly confronting her role in the betrayal, finally recognizing that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. There was genuine remorse, but also a lingering sense of resistance, a struggle to disentangle her identity from my father's authority. I found myself in a period of intense reflection, spending the days between Christmas and New Year's, walking the snowy streets of the neighborhood, reviewing the timeline of betrayal I'd created. The most profound realization was that my worth was not defined by family approval. For years, I had subconsciously sought validation, a pat on the head, an acknowledgement of my efforts that never came. My act of exposure was not revenge. It was an act of self-respect, a declaration of my own moral boundaries. The immense sorrow I felt over the loss of my family was real, but it was powerfully mixed with a triumphant sense of empowerment. I had been vulnerable, but I had shown resilience. I was bruised, but I was standing tall. The community engagement shifted almost immediately. The neighbors who had previously averted their eyes now stopped me on the street, not with pity, but with admiration. Mrs. Davies, the council member, called and formally offered support for my grant, explicitly stating, "It takes immense courage to choose integrity over convenience, Sophia. We need people like you in leadership." My friendships, particularly with Emily, were strengthened, welded together by shared moral clarity. I was no longer the miller's good-hearted daughter. I was Sophia Miller, a woman who had fought for what was right and won her freedom. I had achieved empowerment, but the cost was the total destruction of my childhood definition of home. It was a bittersweet feeling, a victory tinged with profound, lonely grief. On New Year's Eve, the phone rang. It wasn't my parents. It was the director of the regional nonprofit consortium. "Sophia, we heard about your situation and frankly we're deeply impressed by your clarity and conviction. We're opening a new branch in the city focusing on ethical land use. We want you to head the launch. It means moving, but it's a tremendous opportunity." It was the unexpected gesture, a professional lifeline, that was the exact opposite of what my family had offered. It was a clear, unattached path to independence. The offer was a test. Would I embrace this new life, fully independent, or would I stay rooted in the ashes of my old life, waiting for a reconciliation that might never be genuine? My finger hovered over the contact button for the consortium director. Moving meant fully severing the ties, walking away from the constant gravitational pull of the Miller name and the old suffocating expectations. I knew what I had to do. The sorrow was present, but the potential for growth was undeniable. I had to choose forward. New Year's Day. The world outside was crisp clean and covered in a fresh layer of silent snow, mirroring the clarity that had finally settled over me. I stood in my kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee, warming my hands, looking not at the house I was preparing to leave, but at the calendar. A new year, a new page, a new life. And this time, I was holding the pen. I had made my choice. I called the director of the nonprofit consortium back that morning and accepted the position. My resolution was clear: I would prioritize personal freedom, ethical clarity, and independence. Moving to the city branch meant redefining my relationship with my family, entirely setting boundaries so wide and firm that their constraints would no longer reach me. My path was no longer about proving myself to them. It was about building a life aligned with my true values. The move itself was fast, a process made painless by the absolute certainty of my decision. Jonathan made one last desperate attempt at contact, a terse email suggesting we bury the hatchet over lunch, but it was clearly motivated by his desire to salvage his business reputation, not true reconciliation. I deleted it without a response. My father maintained his distant, wounded fury, but my mother Margaret came to see me the day before I left. She didn't offer financial help or try to talk me out of moving. Instead, she brought the battered, handwritten recipe book for the cornbread stuffing, the one that had been symbolically ignored on Thanksgiving. "Keep this, Sophia," she whispered, her eyes wet but clear. "And forgive me. Not for them, but for you." It was a small, fragile piece of closure, a concession that felt more valuable than any inheritance. I accepted her apology not as a command to forget, but as an acknowledgement of her own late-stage awakening. In the city, I stepped into my new role, heading the Ethical Land Use Division. It was a challenging job that demanded strategic thinking, the kind of professional ambition Jonathan had always mocked. But here, my values were rewarded. I was immediately welcomed and respected, and I quickly began to carve out a respected role within my local circle, embodying the resilience and leadership I had discovered under pressure. Emily moved to the city shortly after, and our bond strengthened further. She was the family I chose, built on mutual respect and honesty. My internal transformation was the most profound change. I was no longer the vulnerable, slightly overlooked younger sister who sought external validation. I was strategically empowered, emotionally clear, and fiercely independent. The vulnerability hadn't disappeared, but it had been channeled into empathy and strong ethical action. I stopped measuring my success by the Miller metrics of wealth and appearances and started measuring it by impact, integrity, and self-worth. I no longer had to navigate the suffocating push and pull of their expectations. The final catharsis was the quiet realization that I didn't just survive the betrayal, I utilized it. The fire of that confrontation had burned away everything weak or inauthentic in my life. My old life felt like a distant, vivid dream, a holiday movie that had ended on a tragic note, only for the protagonist to realize the tragedy was actually her liberation. The final scene took place on New Year's Eve, exactly 1 year after the confrontation. I was in my new small apartment high up with a sprawling view of the city lights. I hadn't gone out to celebrate. Instead, I had prepared a meal just for myself. The apartment was still being broken in, but I had strung up a single simple strand of white lights across the main window, creating a soft, warm glow. I cooked a simplified, smaller version of my grandmother's stuffing recipe, its scent filling the space. The table was set for one impeccably clean and perfectly peaceful. I sat down, poured a glass of wine, and raised the glass not to a legacy or a false tradition, but to the skyline, to my own fierce heart. The moment was reflective and profoundly free. This closing image was my rebirth. The holiday season, which had once framed my greatest betrayal, now framed my greatest triumph. The peaceful table set just for me symbolized agency and hope, not the hollow hope of returning to a flawed family, but the absolute certainty of moving forward alone and on my own ethical terms. The silent table was silent no more. It was simply mine. And that, finally, is where Sophia found her peace, a future entirely of her own making. The table may have gone silent, but her voice never will. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and hard-won independence resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more cinematic stories. We read every single comment of your thoughts on Sophia's difficult choices. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.